Next, we're going to create the trending today section or component. We will approach this the same way we did before. We'll break it down into smaller pieces that are easy to create. And from now on, I'll refer to this as the divide and conquer technique or algorithm. A divide and conquer algorithm breaks down a problem into 2 or more subproblems until they are simple enough to solve directly. The smaller solutions are then combined to solve the original problem. And this is exactly what we're doing when we create and style many small elements and then combine them to create larger components and then the whole web page. Okay, let's apply the divide and conquer algorithm here to create the trending today section. So first, there is this line that separates the searches section from the trending today section. Then we have this section name in all capital letters and the icon. Then we've got a list of trending items where each item has a title with bold and slightly larger text and a description, a community icon and a name, and then a larger image with slightly rounded corners and a line between each item. And finally, when we hover over an item or click on it, the cursor becomes a pointer and its background color changes. So this is what we're going to create next. First, let's add this line. We'll add it as the bottom border of the search results container. The line is continuous, so its style should be solid. It's really thin, so I can tell by eye that its width is 1 pixel, but let's check that in the DevTools along with its color. Okay, if I try to inspect the line, notice that as soon as I move the cursor away, the drop-down disappears. This is not convenient, and you probably noticed it because it's happened many times before. And so that happened because when I clicked on the drop-down element, the search input, which is this text field, lost focus, and the drop-down is styled to be visible only when the focus is on the input. So to make the drop-down stay visible even when there is no focus, let's use the DevTools to emulate that focus state. And for that, I'm going to inspect the search input. Make sure that you inspect the input, not the search div. Otherwise, it won't work. So I'm going to select the input and then turn on the focus option. And this will act as if we clicked on the search input, and now we can see the drop down all the time. And even if I click anywhere outside of the drop down, it stays visible, which makes it much more convenient to work with this drop down than before. Now let's try to inspect the recent searches container again. Notice that this time when I move the cursor away, the drop down stays visible. Okay, and we are interested in the recent searches container, not the list item. And let me collapse the emulation section. There it is, the bottom border. It's 1 pixel, solid, and has a very transparent black color. And so I'm just going to click on the value and copy the entire value here. Now let's find the recent searches rule. Where it is. Here's the rule. We want to add border bottom here and paste the value. And when I reload the page, okay, the changes are barely visible, but you can still see this very thin border here. And don't worry, we will see the line when we add more content. Okay, next, let's add this trending today header. So first of all, let's think of how we'll organize the HTML code of our component in general. As we discussed earlier, it is convenient to put the entire component in a container div so that it's easy to work with and move around. And this is what we're going to do here in our index.html. Okay, we're done with the recent searches, so we don't need to see its code anymore. And for that, I collapsed the code of the entire UL element. And by doing this, We're hiding the code inside the list, but the code is still there. Okay, then after the recent searches, let's add a div with a class trending today, like this. And this div will be the container for the entire component. This component starts with the trending today header, which consists of this text and this icon. They are on the same line, so it's going to be convenient to put both the text and the icon inside another div, which will be a container for this header. See how we use the divide and conquer algorithm here. We have a big container for the whole component, and then we'll have a smaller container inside it, and we'll keep doing this until there is nothing left to divide. Okay, so in our code, we'll add a div with the header class. We'll add the image and the text inside this div. And I'm going to add the image element. Let's leave the source attribute empty until we download the icon. We've got enough classes here to target this image from our CSS code, but let's add a simple class here to be even more specific. It's going to be just image. And this is just in case if we decide to add more images to the header in the future. Then let's add a span element for the trending today text. We could use a div element instead. It makes no difference because we're making the header a flexbox container. But for the sake of practice, we'll use a span here. Let's also add a class here. It'll be title. Let's type in trending today here. And this is going to be our HTML for the header. Now let's see how it looks in the browser. This is weird. The text is on the right side, but it should be on the left side by default. So let's inspect the span element to see its styles. Okay, our span has no styles here, but what I notice is that the trending header has this little flex badge, which means that it's a flex container for some reason. And this is weird because we didn't write any styles for the header and it should be a regular block element by default. Now let's inspect the header to see its styles. Okay, I see what's going on here. This is what happens when we use class names that are too generic. Because we used the header class to style our header at the top of the page. And now we used the header class for the trending today header. And it's getting all these styles from the header, even though we don't want it to. To fix this, we can simply make the name of the trending header class more specific. And we can do that by just adding trending today to the beginning of the class name. And now it has a new class name that should be unique to this component. And if I reload the page, okay, this is much better. The text is aligned to the left, just as I would expect it to. So if you don't want an issue like we just had, use more specific and less generic names for your classes, unless you're creating a generic component like a generic button. Okay, and let's just add this prefix to these classes just in case. Good. Next, let's use the actual trending today icon here. For this, I'm going to go to the reference page and save image as. This is an icon, so I'm going to save it in the icons folder. And now we can update the source attribute here. It will be images, so images, then icons, and then trending.svg. And if I reload the page, okay, there it is, our icon. The icon is not fully visible because remember that we configured the drop-down to hide anything that overflows. We will fix that in a moment. And for that, we'll need to add space to the top and sides of the header. And I'm talking about this space above and to the left. We've done this enough times, so I'm going to ask you to pause the video again and do it yourself first. You'll need to set the padding property here and use the DevTools to get the padding value. So pause the video and use the padding property to fix this issue. Now let's do this together. And for that, I'm going to inspect the header here. And the padding is 12 pixels from the top and 16 pixels on the sides. And to target the header, let's copy its class name. And then at the end of the style sheet, we'll add another CSS rule, and the padding will be 12 pixels from the top, 16 pixels from the right, 0 pixels from the bottom, and 16 pixels from the left. And actually, if the right and left values are the same, we can remove the left value from here and have it like this. And the browser will apply 16 pixels to both the right and left sides. And reload the page. Great. This seems to be right. And if I inspect the header and go to the computed tab, you can see that the header has exactly the padding we configured, 12 from the top and 16 from the sides, and nothing from the bottom. Okay, the next thing I notice is that the color of our icon is slightly different from the color of the icon here. So let's inspect this icon to see its styles. Oh, okay. This is because the icon has the opacity property set to 0.6. This means that it's only 60% visible or opaque and 40% see-through or transparent. So let's apply this to our icon as well. And for that, I'm going to inspect our icon and copy its class name, and then add a new CSS rule. And inside the rule, we'll set the opacity property to 0.6, which is 60%. And if I reload our page, there you go. Our icon here looks exactly as the icon here. So I think we're done with styling this icon, and next let's style the trending text. First of all, notice that it's all uppercase. In the tutorial on styling text, we learned that we can use the text transform property to make our text uppercase. And for that, we're going to inspect the title, copy its class name, and then add one more CSS rule. And then we'll set the text transform property to uppercase. And when I reload the page, okay, that's uppercase, good. Next, the color is different here. So I'm going to inspect the title and also copy the color. And also I see here that we need to set the font size property to 14 pixels and change the font weight to 400. So let's remember that. Okay, and for our title, we want to change its color to the one that we just copied. And then the font size, I believe it's 14 pixels. And then the font weight will be 400. And now when we reload the page, this is much better. Now the color, the font size and weight match the reference design. But what I notice here, if I switch back and forth, and you may have noticed this with some of the previous text as well, is that the text font doesn't match. And for that, let me zoom in here to see it better, and here too. Now compare this T letter, for example, here and here. Look how different they are. And this is because we haven't configured any fonts on our page, so we're using default fonts. And on the reference page, it's using, well, let's see what it's using. We're interested in the font family properties, so it is Roboto. So the trending today header is using the Roboto font. And this is why it's different from ours. So I suggest that we change the font on our page to Roboto as well. The problem is that the Roboto font is not a default font and it's not available on all devices. So as a solution, we'll use Google Fonts to make it available to our users. Google Fonts is a free service and you don't have to register in order to use it. So let's open a new tab and search for Google Fonts. Then we'll open this first link, and inside this search input, let's search for Roboto and press enter. And this will list all the available fonts. We are interested in the one that's just called Roboto. Let's click on it to open. This is a page with a lot of information about the font. For example, if we open the About tab, it says that people used this font 66.6 billion times over the last week, and that this font is featured in more than 627 million websites, which I think is pretty cool, and those are huge numbers. So to add it to our website, let's click on this Get Font button, which will open up a page that looks like a shopping cart showing fonts that we've selected. And in my case, it's just one font, Roboto. Most of the time, we're not interested in downloading the font. We want to get the embed code. So let's click on this button. Then scroll down a bit to load this embed information. On the left side, we can configure what font styles we want to use on our page. This is mostly used for advanced performance optimizations. And we are interested in this area to the right. Here we've got tabs with instructions how to embed the font on different platforms. And we are interested in the Web tab because we want to include the font to our website. And so it gives us two ways to load the font, via the link tag and via the import CSS at rule. The general recommendation here is to use the link over the import, unless you have a very compelling reason to use the import, which is rarely the case. And the reason you want to use the link is it provides better performance. Also, it's better for SEO, search engine optimization, and it's more widely supported by different web browsers. So we'll use the link. And here we're instructed to embed the code below in the head of our HTML. We could also embed the code in the body and it would work, but embedding it in the head is generally better, because this way the browser loads the fonts before it displays any content on your web page. And your web page will be displayed with this custom font from the beginning. But if you include this code in the body, depending on where you put it, for users on mobile or with slow internet connection, your web page might be displayed using a default font first, and only when the custom font is loaded, all the text that uses the custom font will change its appearance, which is not a pleasant experience and also bad for SEO. So let's listen to Google's wisdom and put the code in the head. For that, let's click on the copy code button, which will copy the code from this area to the clipboard. Then we'll go to the index.html file, scroll up, and paste the code at the end of the head element. It doesn't really matter where you put it unless it's in the head. But in general, it's a good idea to group your link styles in a way that makes sense for you. For me, it makes sense to put our custom style sheets first and close together, and then the Google font style sheets, and visually separating them with a new line. This way, we have a slightly easier access to our custom style sheets that we change more often than the fonts. And let's indent these two links. Okay. And here, the first two links that we pasted, they are not style sheets. These are directives that improve performance by preparing certain things beforehand. And this third link is a style sheet that contains CSS instructions to load the Roboto font we want. Now we're all set to use the font with our text. For that, let's go to the search.css file and find the trending today title rule. And here we'll write font family. Remember, this is the property that we use to set one or more custom fonts for our text. As a value, we need to specify the name of the font that we want to use. And where do we get the name of our custom font? Well, we can get it from the same page where we get the embed code. Let's scroll down a bit. And after the embed section goes this second section where Google gives us different examples of how we can use the font in our CSS code. And this is where we can get the exact name of the font that we want to use, which is Roboto in quotes. Let's copy this value and paste it here in our code. And if I go back to our page and reload it, there you go. The font has changed to Roboto. And let's compare it to the reference page. Great. I think that we've got it right. Okay. It is a good practice to set a fallback font in case the browser can't load the Roboto font for some reason. For example, if the Google Font Service stops working. And for that, let's go back to our styles and extend the font family declaration. We'll write comma and then sans serif. And you probably remember from the tutorial about how to style text that sans serif is not a font, it is a group of fonts, or in other words, a generic font family. And if we specify it as a second font after Roboto, in case if it fails to load the Roboto font, then the browser will use any of the sans serif fonts available on your user's computer. This is why writing it this way is a good idea. And it's actually considered as a best practice to always specify a generic font family at the end of the list whenever you use a custom font. And with this, if I reload our page, there are no visual changes because the Roboto font is successfully loaded and applied. And the fallback font is only applied if the browser fails to load the Roboto font. And let me zoom out here, go to the reference page. And I think that we're almost done with the trending header. There's just a few little tweaks we need to make before we move on to the next part. We need to make sure that both the text and the icon are aligned vertically in the center, and also add more space between them like here. To achieve this, it's a good idea to use Flexbox and the gap property to add more space. You already know how to do this, so I'm going to ask you to pause the video and do this yourself first to get more practice, which is essential if you want to build your coding skills. Okay, and now let's do this together. I'm going to inspect the header to find out the exact gap value that we need. And it's 8 pixels, great. And I can see this align item center declaration here. But I think that in our case, we'll be fine without it, just with Flex defaults. So we want to enable Flexbox for the header. And we already have a CSS rule for the header. So let's find the rule and extend it. We'll write display flex, and also gap will be 8 pixels. And now when I reload our page, I think that our header looks the same as the header on the reference page. Yes, perfect. This means that we have finished styling the trending today header, and we can move on to creating the trending items list. Now, if you're up for a challenge and you want to quickly improve your CSS skills, I highly recommend that you try creating and styling this list yourself. You already have and know everything that you need. It may be difficult to see at first, but the trending today list is actually a slightly more complex version of the recent searches list. So just like in the recent searches, use the UL element as a container here. Then use the li list item element to contain all the HTML of one item from this list. And you already know how to download and include images and how to adjust their width and make round corners using the border radius property. You can use Flexbox to place these on the same line. You already know how to style images to have this shape of a circle and how to set a background on hover and on click. So apply the divide and conquer technique to split this big component, to split this big component into smaller pieces that you know how to create. And don't worry too much. Just go and try creating the trending list yourself. It's going to be a great practice for you, even if you get stuck at some point. And if you get stuck, don't worry. We'll create this list together in the next video. And I'm going to add the link here when it's ready.